Thank you for joining our podcast. This is Matt McGregor and Bill Connon, your hosts, and today we are talking about a very interesting subject that industrial guys don't typically talk about, which is office. So many industrial tenants and even brokers go into a deal really looking at the criteria of the warehouse and the cubic storage capacity and the location of it and the access and the truck courts and all that. And when it gets to the office design, even if it's a huge office design, a huge amount of square footage, there's not a lot of thought into it. And so we decided to do a special podcast today on what industrial tenants and brokers should be thinking in terms of the design and criteria when thinking about office design in industrial space.
Yeah, and we're really fortunate to have, as a guest today, Greg Inglin with us. Greg is one of the top office brokers in the entire country and has probably leased more office space over the last 5 years in Seattle than any other broker. So pleasure to have Greg here with us.
Thank you, Greg.
Thanks, guys. Glad
Greg,
to be here.
Yeah, good to have you. I think a good place to start might be office space as it relates to recruitment and retention of talent. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, that is the number one thing when it comes to office space. What these tenants are looking for, it's really about hiring the best people and keeping the people they have. Because, if you just follow the headlines, it's like an arms race between these tech tenants for hiring good people. And we're fortunate in the Northwest that this is a place they want to be. But if you think about it in like college football terms, in recruitment, right? You think the University of Oregon has this awesome facility, right? They want to show it off when they tour people and recruits and prospects. The tech sector is very similar. They get benefits and great salaries and all that, but it's also about having great space that people want to work in. And then the other part of it is about efficiencies and productivity. These real estate directors and executives making office decisions, they want to get the most out of their people. So that might mean having a cafeteria as part of their bigger space because their people can eat lunch, a good lunch, and they can get right back to work, right? So the decisions on office space, particularly for the large tenants, they're not worried about the last 50 cents of rent, right? They're worried about location and the quality of the space that is going to lead them to hire good people.
That's a great point. And industrial tenants, I don't know, and we'd love to understand the process that you go through, because I would say industrial tenants, you spend 99% of your time negotiating everything to do with the warehouse. And then, the landlord will shoot us over some, if you need 8,000 or 15,000 feet, they'll shoot us over some space plan, and maybe we'll go through one or two little changes in space plan, and it goes back and forth a couple times, and it's good.
Right.
So nobody's thinking about, how many people are in here, how big, per square foot per person, and, relights and, all of the things for recruiting and retention. So what should industrial tenants think about in regards to that?
Well, there's some great architects out there that have done some studies on this, and the things that matter to people in an office environment, and think about your own office environment, is natural light. That's important to people, right? Yep. So, and you think about an industrial warehouse and, maybe the office space has windows just on one side, but whether it's skylights or windows, the amount of natural light coming in affects the employees, right?
Right.
And there's studies that show people have less sick time, right? But with the more natural light they have.
Right. So
maybe lower cubes, higher ceilings, just something that gives it that volume. And, you think about the work environment, that you would want to be in versus just as an afterthought. The other thing, and this applies to, all office space, is, it's tending to be more open these days in office space, particularly with large tech tenants. But even professional services, we're seeing law firms start to have, or financial firms even have more open space and more, we call them cube farms back in the day, but they're lower cubes or they're benching style, and you can fit more people in. But the reason they also like to do that is those employees are interacting more with each other because they see each other, they hear each other. If you go that route, you also have to think about privacy with like phone rooms, breakout rooms, things like that, and if you're planning a 200,000 square foot office space versus a 5,000 square foot office space, it's all relative, right?
Sure.
It's got to be to scale. But I think natural light, ceiling heights, the kind of how people interact with each other are really the keys to how successful that build out's going to be for that tenant.
Yeah, and it's interesting. You mentioned collaboration, and I think that in the office world, when office tenants are looking for space, oftentimes that space really reflects who they are as a brand, what they want their brand to be. So if they're very highly collaborative, they have that open feel. What are you seeing in the office world as companies are becoming more and more aware of their space reflecting their brand? Are you seeing certain trends in that space?
Yeah, I think you see it a lot of times in the lobby areas where they might interact with the public or their clientele more. They certainly want to have their branding in the, when you get off the elevator and you enter the space. I mean, that's probably the most key area. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of branding there. But even as you work your way around the office, instead of just a painted wall on a hallway, they might have a history of the company there, right? That the architect has helped develop, or their mission statement painted on the wall, pictures of their employees or their families and things like that. The other thing they do, maybe not so much branding but collaboration, is back in the day, it used to be like the kitchen area, right, mm-hmm. is an afterthought.
Right.
And you throw it kind of along the corridor, kind of internal, where it might be darker because that's the hardest space to figure out what to do with.
Right.
Today, those tenants are actually putting the kitchen area in the best corner with the window line.
Interesting.
Because it's much bigger. Because when you do that, more people use that kitchen.
Yeah.
Right? More people.
Camaraderie.
Yeah, they come together.
Yeah.
You have company parties there.
Interesting.
And that interaction that employers are hoping to see, amongst their employees, that just happens naturally in places like that. Or you might have breakout spaces, right, in where teams of 3 to 5 people can just sit down on a couple of couches, and maybe there's a whiteboard nearby. Just kind of making it easy for people to get, away from their cube and get together. And again, it's the employers. Their greatest investment, again, isn't the real estate, right? It's the intellectual capital that their employees are bringing to work every day,
yep.
Right? That's really what they're investing in. So you're trying to create an environment that's going to bring that out in people. I mean, that's where the value is. The value is in keeping good people and what they produce. Retraining somebody or retraining for a spot where you just lost 3 people. I mean, think about the cost of that, right?
For sure.
Compared to spending a little bit more on a little bit better office layout.
Yeah, I could even see that being dramatically important for industrial owner landlords, because there's so few cool office build outs that you quite often you walk into warehouses when you're showing them to tenants, they all look very, similar, right? A lot of them, but when you walk in a cool, really cool, great office space like Greg is describing in the industrial sector, it really pops, probably more than anything. And so from a leasing standpoint, second, third generation, if you've spent that extra money and thought, I would think that would really help landlord as well.
Well, and when you think about where the executives are spending most of their time, mm-hmm. it's the office space,
That's
right? And so that could make a difference between a company choosing one building over another. I mean, we recently sold a building in Auburn, and the office was contemporary, it was cool, and everybody that walked through it was really impressed. And it would be a standard office build out in a downtown, mm-hmm. high rise, right? Yeah. But for the industrial space, people were blown away because you just never see it.
That's right. And, Sumner Ridge, we built 2 buildings up on the hillside that both pre-leased, to Greg's point, because of light and the view, mm-hmm. right? And because those guys wanted those corporate offices, and they went, wow, right? This is a huge difference. And we pre-leased against great buildings that are still vacant today.
It doesn't have to be expensive necessarily, right? I mean, it doesn't have to, that office build out, you don't have to build out the Google standard, right? Within an industrial setting. But if you think about the light or things that stand out to you, and let's say you have 20 staff working in there, maybe some executives, but also administrative and support people. It takes time and energy to refill those positions, right? So if you can give those folks a better office environment it's going to pay you back, right?
That's a great point.
Yeah. My sister just went to work for a company that's based here in Seattle, and one of the things that they have a separate, downstairs they have this bar that's a really cool space that allows a lot of people go, at 4:30, 5 o'clock after they're done working, and they're still talking work, right? But it keeps people there.
Yeah.
Greg's got a bar in his office.
He does. Yeah. He does have a bar in his office. Yeah,
it keeps people there.
All the bottles are empty.
It keeps people there.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Greg, hey, real quick on you mentioned different sizes. We're familiar with terms like dock height doors and clear height and things like that. Tell us about the terms in office, like how many square foot per person are you supposed to have, and what's a floor plate, and what's what are these? Give us the quick 5 office terms, but more importantly, square foot per person. What are the rules with that?
So it varies, right? If you have a lot of offices, it's going to go up because it's not as efficient, right? But I mean, generally speaking, it used to be 200 square feet per person, but today it's more. I'd say it's closer to 150 to 165.
That's a lot of kind of open working space cubes.
Yeah, I mean it'd be for an average office that say a 5,000 square foot office. You might have 2 or 3 private offices, 1 conference room, a kitchen area, kind of a cube area, and then a server room or something like that. That'd probably average out to 165. So 165 square feet per person is just a kind of a general average. Up to 200. It's still going to fit in that range. But I mean, the terms that you'll see most frequently, floor plate size, right, which you want to understand, how your space is fitting in the building. I think you hear load factor. So on office space, without getting too far in the weeds, there's 2 things. There's a usable square footage and a rentable square footage.
Okay.
And the difference between those 2 is a load factor. So the usable is actually, if it's 10 by 10, it's 100 square feet, right? Mm-hmm. But if there's a 10% load factor, you're going to pay rent on 110 square feet, right? Because that 10% that you're paying, but you don't feel like you're using, is the divided space of the lobby or the gym. It's common area.
Okay.
Yeah, or amenity area, which we haven't talked about, but that's important. So if you have a big gym, or some breakout space that everybody can use, you share in that through your load factor. So that comes down to efficiencies, right? So if one building has a pretty low load factor, it's going to plan out more efficiently than another building that has a higher load factor, right? So your space will go further. And then, the rest is pretty similar. I mean, we deal with, ROFO rights and things like that, which you guys do. Sure. I think operating expenses are another thing that, are probably different than office in how those charges are passed through to the tenant. Right. So understanding operating expenses is important because that can differentiate one building from another. And then it's really... you want to know ceiling heights. We like to know the height of the windows. In our office building where we are today in 2 Union Square, the ceiling height, the finished ceiling height is 8.5 feet, and the top of the window line is 8 feet. In the new office buildings I'm working on today, the top of the window line is at 10 feet. So you're getting a lot more window line in newer office buildings, which is kind of changing that tenant experience.
So you think maybe industrial developers should consider on their panels a taller window line?
If it's possible. Yeah, if on that corner of the building, let's say, where the office is going to go, if you can do a higher window line, the more window you can get, I think the better. Yep. That... Whenever I tour tenants, and I mainly work on the agency side, so listing broker, but when tenants come through a space and there's a window in front of them, they always they walk straight to the window. Or they walk straight to the view, if they have an option, right? And that's telling of what our instincts are. Like we want to go see what's outside. We want to see the view. We want to understand. Like if I'm going to be working here, what am I going to be looking at all day? That's and that just tells you what that human nature, is desiring, right? Which is window line, which is light. So those are really the kind of the big factors when you're, without getting in the weeds too deep on the office side.
That's great. Well, these were awesome points, Greg. We want to thank you so much for this. We feel a little bit smarter.
Yeah, a lot smarter.
Hey, we used the phrase intellectual capital. I don't know if that's the first time on this podcast, but it might be.
I'm definitely using it on the next one.
Okay,
so,
go ahead.
Intellectual capital. Yeah.
Feel free.
Yeah, load factor. I got it all.
You got it all.
No, that was great. Thank you, Greg.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Appreciate it. Thanks for the listeners. As always, industrialadvisors.com. You can find us on all your favorite podcast apps. Thanks a lot.